Y'all, my name is Dylan, and I am an engineer at Pipedream. I want to walk through how to create a basic pipeline on Pipedream in just a few minutes. So we're going to route GitHub issue notifications to a Slack channel, and I'll show you just step by step how this works on a Pipedream pipeline. So first, you want to visit pipedream.com and click Create a New Pipeline. You can sign in with GitHub or Google. I pre-filled this Pipedream test user, so you can choose whatever username you want, and continue. So immediately you're brought to the pipeline creation screen. Every pipeline should have a name, so in this case, what are we doing? We're going to send GitHub issues to Slack. You can add a description if you want, and then every pipeline on Pipedream begins with a source. So this is where you send data that runs through your pipeline. We've got a generic webhook source to accept any data from third-party webhooks, and this is a generic endpoint that I'm going to use in this demo. We also have endpoints specific to a bunch of third-party SaaS apps like Stripe, SendGrid, even GitHub. So I'm going to click webhook. When I do that, we create this endpoint specific to your pipeline, and you can send any HTTP requests from anywhere on the web here. So I'm going to copy this and then go over to our docs repo. So you can go to whatever GitHub repository you want for this example. Go to your settings, click on webhooks, and then I want to add a webhook. Okay, so just for those of you who might not be familiar, a webhook is a way for GitHub to notify you of new events that happen in a repository and send an HTTP request for those events in real time to some endpoint you specify. So in our case, the endpoint is the Pipedream source URL I got from my pipeline. There's a couple things specific to GitHub we have to configure. I want to accept a JSON payload when GitHub sends a new webhook. I can configure a secret. I won't now. We want to keep SSL verification. Pipedream supports SSL by default. And then what events would I like to trigger this webhook? So in our case, I just want new issue notifications. You can choose from a variety of interesting events for a GitHub repo, but in my case, I just want to show y'all how to manage issues. I'll uncheck pushes, that's checked by default, and we'll keep the webhook active. Okay, so let's add a webhook. The first thing that GitHub does is send a test webhook event to the endpoint URL specified. So I see that event pop up here. Let me click on it and I'll show you what this looks like. So we show the date and time that the event was received by the source. Show you the path so you can send data to custom paths, all sorts of things that we'll go over through this demo. The most important thing here to note is when I click on the event, I see the body that GitHub sent. This is the payload that GitHub sent with that event. So I see all this information, and we'll dig into here when we actually send issues to Slack. GitHub sends a very, very large payload with all this interesting information about the repository and the event type that triggered this webhook post. So in addition to the body, I see things like the IP address from which the event was sent. I see the HTTP method and all this other Pipedream provided metadata. We won't dig into that now, but just know that you have access to that in a pipeline, and you can write code that uses these properties. So the most important thing to understand about this too is $event is a variable that we expose to you when you're writing Node.js code to get access to this event. So I'm going to scroll down. Again, this is a very large payload that GitHub sends. I'm going to add a code cell. Okay, so a code cell allows you to write Node.js code and use any NPM modules just by requiring them within a code cell. So the most simple thing that I can do to start is just to console.log $event. Let me save my pipeline. I see my code cell there. And let me go ahead and add a new issue. We'll make sure that this webhook is actually set up correctly. So back in my repository, right, I've set up the webhook, submit a new issue, this should trigger a new event in my pipeline. Okay, so I click on this. I see, again, the dollar event, the whole body, and the Pipedream provided HTTP metadata. I scroll down, and here's my code cell. Okay, diff, we'll get into in a moment. If you made any modifications to dollar event, it would show up here in the diff. So you can add properties, delete properties, update properties, anything in dollar event that you have access to here, you can read from or mutate. And any changes you make will show up here. So again, the next code cell will actually get into that. But right now, I just did console.log. So in this next section below, I see, again, just the same thing I saw up there. I see dollar event. So obviously, you typically wouldn't want to log dollar event since you already have access to it, but I just wanted to show you briefly how you could execute Node.js code within a code cell in reaction to a new event getting sent from GitHub. So now let's actually do something interesting with this. I'm going to scroll down. I'll go ahead and delete this code cell, because that was just an example. I'll add a new one. I'm going to cheat just a little bit, because the code for grabbing the data I want about new issues is just a little bit complex. So again, GitHub contains, they put a lot of information in the payload they send from their webhooks, right? And that's great because you can operate on any of that. It provides a lot of flexibility. But for simple use cases, you have to dig in to all these nested properties to get what you want. So again, I want to send new messages about issues, any new issues, closed issues, anything, to a Slack channel. So Slack needs this really basic object to get sent into an incoming webhook, which I'll show you in a second, for how that text is formatted. So they basically need an object with this single property text that contains the string that you actually post in the channel. So what I'm saying here is I'm sending a message that says issue in, and I'm going to label the repository with the URL as a link. So the repository name will show up as the text in the message. It'll link to the repository URL here. And then additionally, I obviously want to link to the new issue. And finally, I'm going to say what the action was, whether the issue was opened, closed, updated, etc. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a destination. Okay, this is where I actually send data to Slack. So a Pipedream pipeline, we've already seen, you get a source to send data to. You can run Node.js code in response to new events sent to your source, and you can route them to destinations. So I'm going to add a webhook destination to send a new event out via HTTP. Okay, so this just sends an HTTP request to whatever URL I specify. In my case, I'm going to add a Slack incoming webhook. Okay, so this just says I send an HTTP event in to Slack, and that gets posted to a new channel. I'll add a configuration to do that. I just went into my Slack app directory, searched for incoming webhooks, and then clicked on that new configuration button. My channel is going to be docs GitHub issue, and I'll add a new incoming webhook integration. So Slack gives you this webhook URL where you send your data to. And then again, they give you this information about what the payload should look like, just a single object with a text property and the message you want to send. I'm going to put that webhook URL here as the endpoint URL for my destination in Pipedream. I'm going to send, as the payload, event.slackMessage. So again, $event is this variable I have access to everywhere in my pipeline, in code cells and destination cells. Event.slackMessage was, again, this basic object I formatted. I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to go back to my issues and raise a new one. So we'll submit that. I'll go back to my pipeline. This is pretty interesting. I see this new event here. I get one of one destinations. So we tell you, you configured one destination, and we successfully delivered this event to that destination. So I'll scroll all the way down, okay? And first I see this is what was sent to this destination. Let's just confirm in Slack. Look at this, incoming webhook. Issue in docs, it's the name of my repository, and then a link to the issue. Have to open that in my other browser. And there we go, okay? So let's go back to the pipeline. Again, end to end, I configured a GitHub webhook URL to send data to this pipeline. I received new events. I made a basic modification using Node.js code, okay, to format this Slack message property. Again, I mentioned the diff before. Now I see that diff here because I'm actually adding this new Slack message property to $event. So any modifications $event, deletions, additions, get represented here in the diff field. I can always take a look at the full state at this point in the pipeline of that object as well, the $event object. And then finally, I sent this Slack message property of $event to this incoming webhook, which triggered this Slack message.